Tonight on Greater Boston, history was made today with the swearing-in of the first ever black woman Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was sworn in by both the Chief Justice and her predecessor, Justice Stephen Breyer, who officially retired today. We'll hear much more from a conversation I had here with Justice Breyer on the court, both past and present, a little later in the show. But first to the current court, which released yet another controversial ruling that will affect every single one of us, likely for generations. In a 6-3 decision, the anti-majoritarian majority significantly limited the government's ability to address climate change, ruling the Environmental Protection Agency cannot regulate carbon emissions from power plants. Instead, that power, so to speak, rests with Congress, said Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority. But if the past few years of Capitol Hill action are any indication, I won't be holding my breath, though with the degraded quality of air, I may have to. Here to discuss the ruling and possibility of its reason being extended to federal regulation of other things, healthcare, housing discrimination, and more, is Bill McKibben. Bill is, of course, the founder of the organization 350.org, which works to build a climate movement for a fossil-free future, Third Act, which works to bring people over 60 into that fight, also the author of dozens of books, including the groundbreaking The End of Nature in 1989, and his latest work, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. Bill, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Jim.
You know, Bill, you wrote in your piece in the New Yorker today about a rallying cry that was put out by not yet then Justice Lewis Powell to businessmen 50 years ago. What did the memo say?
Well, this famous Powell memo was the sort of beginning of the fight back against, among other things, the formation of the EPA the year before and the passage of the Clean Air Act. And what he said is, we are going to have to use all the wealth at our disposal to win this country back. And this week, that's what we've been seeing. It's worth noting that all the decisions that we've seen, the decisions on guns, the decision on Roe, the decision on the Clean Air Act, target things that happened in that brief window of time, 1968 to 1973 or so. They've been waiting a long time and patiently building the wherewithal to decimate and destroy those decisions, and now they've done so. This has been an epic week in American political history.
So 5 decades later, what does this EPA decision mean for the country?
Well, this EPA decision means in the short run that it's going to be very hard for the EPA to do anything about climate change. It takes away most of their authority to regulate carbon. In the slightly longer term, it seems to be setting up a situation where the court will deny agencies in general the right to do much regulating. And for the world, and this may be the largest consequence, it undercuts any ability that America has to lead in this fight. The saddest person on the planet today has got to be John Kerry, because I don't have any idea how our International Climate Envoy goes and talks to the Chinese or the Indians after this.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, the tentacles of this potentially reaching well beyond the climate. Paris Climate Accords, I assume, eviscerated by this. The zero emission goals of Joe Biden, same category, no?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that he can meet the targets that he's set, or it becomes infinitely harder without being able to do this kind of common sense regulation.
You know, I was thinking of you today when a listener unfortunately sent me a copy, which I had forgotten about, of Amy Coney Barrett at her confirmation hearing when she was asked, I think by Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, about what she'd read about the climate. Here's what Coney Barrett, now Justice Coney Barrett, had to say.
I'm certainly not a scientist.
I'm not saying you are.
I mean, I've read things about climate change. I would not say that I have firm views on it.
Well, she has firm views now. And let me just add to that part of what Chief Justice Roberts said in his opinion today. Capping carbon dioxide emissions at a level that will force a nationwide transition away from the use of coal to generate electricity may be a sensible solution to the crisis of the day. I can't even read any more of it. What was your reaction when you read those words, the crisis of the day, Bill McKibben?
I mean, as I wrote in the Globe earlier today, this Supreme Court decision will be visible in the geologic record for eons to come. There's nothing that the Supreme Court's done that will last longer than this, because at these are the crucial few years when we have to be turning the corner in this fight on climate change, and they just made it harder. Not impossible. There's some things we can do, but much, much harder.
I want to get to the possible in a couple of minutes. Just by chance, we had the mayor of Boston and the climate reporter for the Globe on our radio show today. And Mayor Wu, who you've praised as an environmental leader, says, well, she believes, I don't know if it was false optimism, I don't want to characterize it, but I'll let you know, local and state governments can fill a decent percentage of the hole. David Abel said the market, with technological advances, things like that. They weren't being naive, suggesting that it could fill the whole hole created by the disarming of the EPA. Are they on to something, or is that faint hope?
Well, look, we have real possibilities. I mean, that's what makes this so tragic. The price of renewable energy has plummeted in the last 10 years, down 90%. It's the cheapest power we've got. So we could move quickly now, but the power of vested interest to get in the way is enormous. They've done that now at the federal level. So yeah, in blue cities and blue states, people will try to do what they can, but it's frankly crazy to be tackling global warming one city at a time. We should be working at the very least as a nation to do this.
Yeah, but just staying on that for a second, you wrote about 1,000 things today, but one of the things I read, didn't you say that even, maybe it was the Globe, that even something like mileage issues or that sort of thing, those passed by a blue state like Massachusetts are subject to challenge with this court as well, no?
The court has indicated that next year it's going to take cases from the same Republican attorneys general in the fossil fuel states, challenging the right of one state to set, say, automobile emission standards. So they're trying to, and don't even try to get at the logic of what we're sending to the states and what, it's all just, these are the outcomes that they want. And man, you gotta say, Big Oil and the Koch brothers got what they paid for over 50 years.
You know, I want to return to what you said a minute ago that concerns me almost as much as the decision itself, the potential for this to be used much more broadly to challenge the so-called administrative state, as critics call it, the regulatory authority of a whole host of federal agencies. My take on this, as sort of a half-assed lawyer, is with a clean power plan not even in place right now, a typical Supreme Court would say, this case is not ready for us, it's not ripe, come back to us when the time is right. And the reason they took it anyway is because they wanted to make this kind of declaration in the EPA case, plant their flag, and then come back and do far more damage to regulatory authority across the board.
Well, and you said it in your introduction quite correctly. They're saying, as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouth, that what they want is for Congress to be supplying regulations. But anybody who's looked at our political system for the last 40 years knows that the idea that Congress is going to be writing explicit regulations about how much methane should, that's just fantasy land. That's why we have things like the EPA stuffed with experts who are good at this stuff. And that's why we give them the authority that they need in order to go act.
And for the people who don't follow the regulatory world, and frankly, I don't either, it's everything from public health to, earlier this year, they struck down the eviction moratorium, saying the CDC didn't have the regulatory power there, the quality of water, the quality of food, Obamacare regulations. It touches virtually every aspect of our life.
This is the billionaires leave me alone caucus that's triumphing at the moment, okay? And it's it's incredibly powerful. But, and here's the thing that I think is important to say. They've won these fights, but they've done it with tiny minorities of Americans behind them. These are hugely anti-majoritarian rulings. 90% of Americans want some common sense gun control. 70 or 65 or 70% want Roe upheld. 70% want action on climate. They have overreached. They've won for the moment, but they've opened themselves up to a backlash like we've never seen before if those of us who want progress in this country are able to seize this moment. This should turn what looked like it was going to be a rout for the Republicans in the fall elections. This should, if we take the fury that we're feeling now and channel it, there's a possibility of a really interesting political outcome going forward.
Can I appeal to your historical knowledge again, as I did at the beginning here? There was a similar situation. You and I both agree it's laughable to suggest this dysfunctional Congress is going to fix any of this, but I think it was, I may get the years wrong, 2000, when the Supreme Court said the FDA, I think, didn't have the power to regulate tobacco. And about a decade later, give or take a year, Congress actually did act. Tobacco is about as hard a nut to crack in terms of standing up to big business. Why were they able to do it then? Do you recall?
Well, I mean, it was because they mobilized hundreds of millions of Americans on the right side. They used the court system in that case successfully, and eventually they were able to summon that political authority. We can do it again, although it must be said big oil is stronger than big tobacco ever was. We can do it again, but it's going to take organizing. The real thing to remember here is why we had the Clean Air Act in the first place. It's because in 1970, 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, went into the streets for the first Earth Day. That was the biggest protest in American history. If we do that again, if we muster that kind of political intensity, then we have a chance. But otherwise, this slow drift towards a kind of theocratic fascism is going to continue. And it is the most depressing week of my life in that regard.
I want to spend the last minute and a second talking about what the targets of those mobilizations should be, because near the end of your New Yorker piece, you write, but beyond, and you meant beyond a narrowed Build Back Better, which is, I guess, remotely possible. It's hard to see exactly what the point of demanding federal climate action is now. Why march on the Capitol of the White House if the Supreme Court won't let elected leaders act even if they want to? So what is the target in this environment, Bill McKibben?
Two targets. One, we got to go after Wall Street too, the big banks and financial institutions that have done this job and that have the possibility of exercising power. But two, we do have to get engaged in this political fight. We have to elect people who will drop the filibuster and expand the Supreme Court. And once we elect them, then we have to not walk away, but go pressure them. Remember those Sunrise Movement kids who sat down in Nancy Pelosi's office and would not leave? That's going to have to be how we deal with even the people we elect, because we are so far behind the eight ball now that it's going to take real work over years.
When you utter the words, we got to put pressure on Wall Street, do you have trouble even having those come out as the last hope, at least now, for fixing this nightmare?
I actually think we can push Wall Street pretty hard. You know, our political system gives enormous power to red states. Wyoming has as many senators as California, but all the money ended up in the blue states. Yeah. 65% of the GDP is in counties that voted for Biden. We can still reach that money. It's in New York and San Francisco and London. Those are places we can fight more easily than Montana and North Dakota.
I'll tell you, one of the few reasons for hope that I have is that you're still there. Bill McKibben, thanks so much for your time as always. I really appreciate it. In each of the Supreme Court decisions released over the past several days, we've read powerful dissents from the three liberal justices, among them Justice Stephen Breyer, who, as we mentioned earlier, officially retired today. Over his nearly 3 decades on the court, Justice Breyer has made a name for himself not only for his dissents, but also for his efforts to build consensus, an idea that feels all but impossible right now. As a recent poll shows, just a quarter of the country has a great deal of confidence in the Supreme Court, the lowest numbers ever. And that falling confidence is something that's long concerned Breyer, as he touched on when he joined me back in 2015. We discussed a variety of topics, from the limits of the Second Amendment to my personal obsession, cameras in the courtroom, term limits, a discussion clearly more relevant now than ever, and his newly released book at the time, The Court and the World, American Law and the New Global Realities. Justice Breyer, very good to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to start by raising my right hand and say, when I picked up this book last night, I thought it was going to be dense, inaccessible for mere mortals. It is eye-opening and terrific. So my apologies in advance. The thesis is, in the era of globalization, the shrinking world, the court has to look beyond our borders. It has to look at the rest of the world, law around the world, experience. Am I right so far?
Yes.
So give us an example, real-world example, from national security, domestic law, environmental. Give us an example of how that works.
Well, think of Dolly Fila-Ortiga. She was from Paraguay. She came to New York in the mid-1970s, and there she discovers the man who tortured her brother to death, also from Paraguay. She also found a very old law passed in the 1790s in order to help victims of pirates. She uses the law, she brings a lawsuit, and she wins. She goes back to Paraguay and she says, I wanted to look that man in the face and I came back with so much more. Well, after her lawsuit, lots of other people brought similar lawsuits. And now we have to begin to interpret the statute, which says an alien can bring a tort suit for a violation of the law of nations. That's a kind of international law. But who, how, what, who are today's pirates? What do we do if South Africa, as it did, say, we don't want American judges getting involved in our problems? We have Truth and Reconciliation Committee. How do we, in fact, interpret that statute? You must look abroad to help answer that question.
Even your colleagues who find that the concept relatively abhorrent would agree in a case like that you have no choice. Is that a safe assumption?
They would look to what was going to happen abroad.
Okay, so but when you speak to looking, is it to inform, for you to consider, or in some cases it's actually fairly determinative, is it not?
In some cases it is. Suppose there's a treaty about domestic relations, about abducting children. And there are lots of others.
Let me talk about where I think it is critical, and I think you do too. I'm going to read a little bit from your dissent, your powerful dissent in that, I think, the final case of the last term, this lethal injection case out of Oklahoma. I note, however, this is you writing, that many nations, indeed 95 of the 193 members of the UN, have formally abolished the death penalty. An additional 42 have abolished it in practice. In 2013, only 22 countries in the world carried out an execution. Almost 80% of all known executions took place in 3 countries, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. But you aren't arguing there that the reason why the death penalty violates the cruel and unusual punishment of the Eighth Amendment is because we're an outlier. That's just one factor, correct?
Correct.
Why? What's the rest of your argument?
I said, first of all, wrong person sometimes. Second, very arbitrary, like being hit by lightning. People who should perhaps don't, and the people who don't do. I mean, third, that there is in fact 18 years on average, 18 years between the time such a sentence is pronounced and the time it's carried out, and very few executions really take place. Put those all together, just a handful of counties have it. The way it's administered, I said, is sufficiently arbitrary, cruel, unusual now, that we should reconsider the matter.
But part of the unusual is what I just read, is it not?
Part of it, but it is ambiguous. Did the founders, when they wrote the relevant clause forbidding cruel and unusual punishments, did they mean unusual in the United States, or did they mean unusual in the world?
Do we have any idea what they meant when they said unusual?
No, I don't think we do.
So, the death penalty, even a court that I think, you may not like this characterization, but I think most observers would say conservative-leaning Supreme Court, even this court has cut back on the death penalty when it comes to mental capacity, juveniles, that sort of thing. So are we on a track to end up where your dissent was, or is that wishful thinking?
It might or might not turn out to be wishful thinking. I said we should reconsider the matter, and we'll see what happens.
Tenure. 21 years?
Yes.
Is that enough?
Perhaps, I don't know. When will I retire? I suppose I will find out from my inner voice, and we'll see.
But what do you think about lifetime tenure? The notion, you have served through the terms of, well, 5 presidential terms, theoretically 5 presidents, some of your colleagues even longer. Is there not something wrong with that picture in your mind?
I think, were it up to me, I would say there should be a long tenure. Whether it's a term of years or not, maybe it would be better to have a term of years, but it must be long, because you don't want a person in that job thinking about his next job. The reason I tend not to get deeply involved in it is it would require, in all likelihood, a constitutional amendment, and opening up the Constitution to all kinds of amendments is not something that I think is going to happen or should happen.
Well, speaking of the Constitution, the Second Amendment was the basis, I believe, of a pretty important case. Was it 2008, the D.C. handgun case? Yeah. As a layperson, even though I was a lawyer when I was a kid, well, much of America is saying we need more gun control. The way I read that decision is that argument could be the basis for eliminating all gun control in this country. Am I off base?
There's a great undecided question. I was against the majority.
I know that.
The majority read the Second Amendment as saying it gives some kind of right. It gives a right to people to keep handguns if they're qualified, etc. And the reason I put in qualified, etc. is they seem, but you make up your own mind, to say that reasonable regulation is permitted. Certainly 47 states that have constitutions with provisions similar to the Second Amendment have allowed reasonable regulation, and I think maybe there's only one or two exceptions. They've approved the regulations that their legislatures have voted. Therefore, the question remains, precisely what kind of regulation will the Second Amendment permit? And I've used the word reasonable, but we'd find out case by case. It has not yet shut off regulation.
How's your job satisfaction? 21 years. I mean, in some ways, I say, as a non-Supreme Court Associate Justice, how terrific to be in the middle of history for almost a quarter century of your life. But then I say to myself, how horrible to be confined to not say what you think about things that it's pretty clear all 9 of you care deeply about, except within the confines of the case before. Is that not wildly frustrating for you?
No. The exception swallows the rule.
Meaning what?
Meaning that I have a lot to do. People take their job very seriously on the court. David Souter said, "You're always on duty." And the reason you're always on duty is because there's always in front of you a string of cases raising legal issues where good judges have come to different conclusions on the same question, text of a statute or text of the Constitution. Now that requires thinking, consideration, some understanding of how it will affect ordinary Americans, putting that together and doing it quite a lot of the days during the year is a very satisfactory thing to do, but you cannot relax. You have to be serious about it.
So you don't have blood pressure problems when there's a big issue you'd like to speak out on just as a human being and you can't. You're fine with that?
Yes, I am fine.
Now, a topic that great Supreme Court observer Stephen Colbert raised with you a couple of weeks ago is something with which I am obsessed, and I use the term loosely, cameras in the courtroom. I want to read back to you what you said, which surprised me, I must say. Will they understand the whole story, meaning the public? Will they understand what we're doing? Will there be distortion? Isn't seeing what's actually happening the ultimate in anti-distortion as opposed to allowing it to be filtered through the likes of me? It's almost condescending. It's almost like real people can't understand what the 9 of us and the litigants do. Is that almost what you're saying?
No, I think in context, the question was, I was trying to get the point across, that 95% of the way we decide is in writing. And that oral argument is just a small part of it. You can say, well, will there be distortion? Maybe not. But he held up a book, a copy of this book, and he said, if you were on television, you wouldn't have to come here to promote your book. You could just hold it up. And I said, exactly. And I heard one person say, and I don't know if it's true or not, but a person who was close to a president said, if the judges were on television, I would have to recommend that a president appoint someone who's good on television. Now, is there some truth to that, or isn't there? I don't know. And is there some truth? People have told me this. Wait till you see. Wait till you see the first time a journalist who isn't necessarily so responsible, I don't know if there are any such people, but suppose you are totally distorted. Will that affect the way you decide the next case? And we're conservative in that respect. We worry about it. This institution has served the country well. So all you're seeing is not a bunch of logical arguments. All you're seeing the other way is, I'm nervous about it. I don't know what the changes would be. I don't want to be the one who is responsible for the court doing worse.
Can I have one last crack at this?
Sure.
Virtually every state court in the country has a camera in the courtroom. When Jahar Tsarnaev was prosecuted in my name and yours, I couldn't see that. When Whitey Bulger was prosecuted also in South Boston, I couldn't see that. Is that not troubling to you? And I know that's even a more difficult situation.
I know it is. Do you want to see? Do you want the neighbors to see? The jurors? Do you want
No,
the
not the
neighbors?
jurors.
No,
They don't
no,
see the
I
jurors
I
in
see.
state
Do
courts.
you want the neighbors to see the case? Earl Warren, the former Chief Justice of the United States, said, a criminal trial is not an entertainment. Now, I think the reality is I'm torn. And I am torn. It's not, I don't lose that much sleep, but nonetheless, look, if you could see on television the arguments put forward in our court, in oral argument, on a case like, does the Constitution permit the state of Arkansas to limit the terms of congressmen to 2 or to 3? It would be terrific.
I don't have to watch.
It would be terrific learning experience.
What did you say to me about your cup when you came out here?
I said there's coffee in it.
Yeah, can I read you? You ever read this book, Pigeon in a Crosswalk?
No.
It's written by the producer of Anderson Cooper. Used to be my producer. Used to be the great Chet Curtis's producer. Mm-hmm. Chet Curtis came and interviewed you in your house. Mm-hmm. There's an essay about that interview. It ends as follows. Here's Chet Curtis. Hell of a guy, meaning you.
That's very nice.
Brilliant. One of the most interesting people I've ever interviewed, pausing as if he had something else to add. But, I said, nervously, and then Chet says, can you believe he gave us instant coffee?
I did.
Is that how you plead? Guilty?
I guess so. I don't normally drink. This isn't instant coffee.
No, believe we don't do that here. Justice Breyer,
Good.
It's great to see you. The book
you.
is fabulous, and I hope people read it.
Thank you very much. Nice.
The book again is The Court and the World, American Law and the New Global Realities. As for Breyer's legacy, here's how he recently told Chris Wallace, he was then with Fox News, it's how he'd like to be remembered.
The best thing they could say, I thought I liked very much because it has an appeal to me, was what Thurgood Marshall said. They said, well, what do you want on your tombstone? And he said he did his best. That's it.
He most certainly did. That's it for tonight. If you missed today's GBH community conversation about the Supreme Court abortion ruling, hosted by Paris Alston, Callie Crossley, and Marjorie Egan, you can find it online at youtube.com/GBH News. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching, and don't forget Ukraine.